August 9th, 2010. That is 8, 9, 10 for any of you who want to go bet the lottery today. It's a good thing. This is the Public Safety Committee. Councilman Smith, Chairman, joined by Councilman Rosine and Councilman Reyes. We'll call the special item first, item number 11.
Special agenda item number 1 is Police Department report pursuant to motion Mizar Parks relative...
One.
A special?
Special one.
Special one. Right. Relative to procedures for monitoring sex offenders.
And with that, we'll now adjourn that, combine it back with the regular agenda.
Yes, sir.
And we'll begin with the following items as consent items, unless there's any objections. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9.
Mr. Chair, on 9, I'd like to just thank...
Right ahead.
Well, one is, I want to thank the officers and the LAPD and everybody involved in this case. It was a very traumatic case. When a baby is a victim of a violent shooting, the whole community rallies around this type of incident. So I want to thank the officers, the detectives, the police department for all their work. There's a lot of heart and soul put into this, and for a very good reason. And I just want to thank you. It's a positive message to the community, and let folks know that they're not alone. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And obviously, that's a rare occurrence. We don't see a lot of reward motions actually get fulfilled, so that's a good one. Number 6, questions? Okay. We'll bring number 6 back on the agenda then. And without objection, then we'll go forward on 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 9. All right. That'll be the order. And then we've combined 1 and 11. We will continue number 10. Can the department tell me when we can have that back by? 30 days? 30 days it is on number 10. That leaves us 1, 6, 8, and 11. We'll take 6 and 8 first, and then 1 and 11 will be last, and we'll combine them. So let's take number 6.
Item 6, CA report relative to ending the police officer relocation assistance program.
Morning. Matt Crawford from the CAO. The report in front of you is our recommendation to end the relocation assistance program for police officer hires. The police department, the personnel department, looking at the number of candidates we have in the pipeline and the candidate pool we have ready right now, combined with the hiring plan we're looking at, we've determined that this is essentially no longer necessary to continue to attract out-of-town candidates.
Okay, and the only thing I'd say is we've already taken that action in the budget, so that
I believe there's still a funding in. We did adjust the amount of the budget for relocation assistance, but there is still money.
There's a few bucks left, but in the budget, we already said we're eliminating the program, so
okay.
There's some residual money left. That
there is some money the department, I'm sure, will find a good use for.
Okay. Mr. Zine.
Yeah, 2 questions, Matt. One is, are there any other incentives that we offer that can be scaled back or eliminated due to the fact that we're not hiring many folks and we've got a number of people looking for jobs?
Not that I know of. It will certainly take another look. I know we had the sworn hiring bonus for a while, and that's been eliminated. I believe we still have a bonus on the books for lateral candidates, people coming from other law enforcement jurisdictions, but I'll take a look at that as well.
I think since we have a pool of qualified people and the unemployment doesn't seem to be improving, we should take advantage of that and reduce those incentives since we have a pool of qualified folks. If we need to do it, then obviously we do, but it doesn't seem that it's necessary. So if you can look at those and whatever we can put back in the general fund, that'll be beneficial. The other question I have is people who are in the pipeline who signed up under the, shall we say, the possibility of receiving that. Because in the past we've had situations where people have come in later, said, I signed up under this condition, and now they're pulling under the rug from under me. Right. Do we have anybody in that category?
There's certainly everyone currently in the pipeline, I suppose, could land in that category if they do make it all the way through and become a police officer. We'll have to go and consult with the city attorney, I think, on where specifically to draw the line, and if people, whether people who have just begun the testing process or people on the lists, we'll need to discuss that with city attorney.
Okay, because
That's exactly where to draw the line.
we need to draw a line at a specific date,
Right.
and that way they'll know, because in the past, we've had situations where they've
With
come
the
back,
bonus, yeah.
and some of them contacted me, this is what I signed up, this is what I was promised, they're not delivering, so as long as we can make it whatever date, and then from that day forward, they're not eligible.
We'll make sure it's clear.
To make it nice and crystal clear for transparent government is what we're looking for.
Got it.
Thank you. And we'll ring the bell after that. Thank you.
And with that, then, we will approve
Number 6.
number 6.
Thank you.
Let's take number 8, which is a receive and file, but it was Mr. Zine's motion, so I'll give you an opportunity if you want to say anything further about this. Take number 8, John?
Oh, sorry.
What do you got, John?
City Attorney report relative to a proposal to amend the LEMC to prohibit the possession or use of body armor by violent felons and the status of pending litigation in People v. Salem.
Mr. Zine, those were your motions. Do you have anything?
And you joined me on that, along with Mr. Koretz, and the state has modified penal code, and we now have the condition where felons can't have those bulletproof vests,
It's a good thing.
so it worked out well for everyone.
So you're
Right.
satisfied with this? We'll receive and file that,
Thank you.
and go to then the combined number 1 and 11. Excuse me. Yeah, 11 and special 1.
Okay. Item 11, motion Zion Smith requesting that the city attorney prepare an ordinance to establish residency restrictions for registered sex offenders and the police department to report on the impact of such restrictions. Special 1, police department report pursuant to motion Mazar Parks relative to procedures for monitoring sex offenders.
All right, from the department?
Good morning, Detective Diane Webb from Robbery Homicide Division, the Registration Enforcement and Compliance Team Supervisor. I was the one who prepared the report in early 2009 regarding the inquiry about the clustering of registered sex offenders. Though I understand that the topic is a bit different today regarding the possibility of a residency restriction ordinance in the city of Los Angeles. And I had offered up the California Sex Offender Management Board report of December 2008 that examined the issues that have to do with the unintended consequences of residency restrictions and the instability it causes in finding residences for registered sex offenders. Currently, in the state of California, since implementation of Jessica's Law back at the end of 2007, California has seen a marked increase in transient sex offenders, which that instability has led to individuals not having access to services, not having a stable location to reside. Incidents here in the city of Los Angeles of transients riding buses all night long because of no place that they can legally reside. These would be paroled sex offenders. And in general, residency restrictions have not shown any correlation in recent studies to a decrease in recidivism, and mainly have just caused instability.
Now, you've seen the ordinances in Riverside and the county of L.A. Do you feel those would work? Do you think those are beneficial for the department?
Actually, no, I don't.
You don't?
I'm not familiar with the actual provisions of those, but according to the studies that are documented in the report, and there's also another report, if you would like to see it, that the state of Colorado did, their Sex Offender Management Board did. What it does increase is when the individuals go homeless because there are many places that they can live. The jurisdiction is still left with registered sex offenders. It's just that a large proportion of them are transient. I know that the city of Los Angeles a couple of years ago did do a prospective report on where registered sex offenders could actually live if there were residency requirements, such as being prohibited from being within 2,000 feet of a school, daycare center, or a park. And it I believe, basically left a lot of areas in Harbor Division, such as in San Francisco, where areas around harbors, dock areas, become some of the only areas that offenders can be in, actually find a residence in. And actually, Harbor Division has seen an increase in the number of registered sex offenders, mainly because locations there have been found to be compliant with the Jessica's Law residency restrictions that cover paroled sex offenders. And so a large number of paroled sex offenders are in shared living arrangements down there where, for example, an apartment building or other location, oftentimes in a semi-commercial area, has been, out of necessity, converted into housing so that paroled sex offenders have some place to live.
Mr. Zine.
Well, I don't think there's a lot of sympathy for sexual offenders, people who commit those crimes, especially against children, and the recidivism, which seems to be a continuing saga. The cluster in the residential setting, we have 47 in an apartment building near a high school, or 19 near daycare centers. I don't know how we could say that would be in the safety of the young individuals who may be their victims or potential victims. So what do you recommend to bring a balance so we will have a sense of responsible governance for the safety of individuals, in particular children with the sex offenders in those communities? Because once the people in the communities find out, they go ballistic. I don't know how we could honestly say that 47 who were in an apartment building near a high school, near the Cal State LA campus, I don't know how we could ever justify that. So what kind of governance, number one, and the second is what kind of compliance do we get and what type of follow-up do we get to make sure they're registering and following what directive they're given when they're released from prison?
Well, currently, all registered sex offenders who are on parole are tracked by the GPS device. So by parole, following up on them, felony probationers, obviously the probation department follows up on them. And within the city of Los Angeles, the registration enforcement and compliance teams regularly do compliance checks on registered sex offenders and also investigate the cases and present them for criminal filing. But you had asked about what could be a solution to this. Actually, the state is moving in the right direction. The California Sex Offender Management Board is working closely with legislators on Assembly Bill 1844, Chelsea's Law, that actually provides evidence-based, workable solutions to the monitoring of sex offenders. It includes an increase of parole time, up to lifetime parole for some of our worst offenders, which would consequently kick in the lifetime GPS monitoring. It would also increase monitoring in general of the registered sex offenders.
Now, the state, we know, is having financial difficulties, $20 billion deficit. How many resources? I mean, we talk about compliance, we talk about enforcement monitoring. How many people are actually doing that? How many folks do they have assigned, probation, parole, that are actually doing any kind of work with all of the issues that the state has with finances? Or is it falling on the backs of the local jurisdiction?
Well, actually, the Assembly Bill is going to provide not only for sex offender treatment, but the increased funding for the lifetime GPS, which basically fell through with Jessica's Law that wasn't applied to all registered sex offenders. So even though there is financial considerations, it seems that it is going to the monitoring of sex offenders because it's an important topic and people care quite a lot about it.
So in the meantime, what do we do before the state with their 1844, and how long that's going to take to enact? What do we do in the meantime where we have this clusters, where we have the people concerned and complaining about it? How do we resolve it locally?
Well, actually, the locations where there are multiple offenders living in one jurisdiction are supervised by state parole, and have not had significant complaints, anything of that sort. And if there is, then parole and local jurisdictions, the REACT teams, meet with them and resolve them. So actually, right now, things are going well. Within the city of Los Angeles, there's over 1,000 paroled sex offenders who are currently on GPS. So their movements are tracked all the time. Over 5,200 registered sex offenders in the city total. So the REACT teams monitor, the parole and probation monitors, Internet Crimes Against Children unit monitors, LA Saves, the program in conjunction with the city attorney's office, regularly go out and do compliance checks. Actually, the city of Los Angeles, in my opinion, is doing the best job in the state of California of monitoring its registered sex offenders with the limited resources that we have now. But it's a very proactive program.
Mr. Zine, continue. Let me ask one question on that 1,000 of the 5,000. Were they chosen because they are cases that we really got to watch, or are they just the newest ones out and that they're applying that new technology?
All registered sex offenders who are on parole for a sex crime or have a sex crime in their past, they're all by statute under the GPS.
Well, you said it was 1,000 out of 5,000.
Correct.
So they're not all on the GPS.
All of the parolees are, all of the 1,000 are.
What about the other 4,000? You said there's 5,000.
Correct. Some are on probation, maybe another
Okay.
10%.
So a different level of...
Right. They may or may not be on GPS. Most of them are not, unless it was ordered by the court. And the rest have simply gone beyond their supervision time, or else they were never under formal supervision at all. Statewide, as with Los Angeles, about 75% of registered sex offenders are under no supervision at all, no formal supervision, such as parole or probation. So it's left to the local jurisdiction, local task forces, local sexual assault felony enforcement teams, which are funded by the state, to monitor those sex offenders.
And our crimes, sexual-related crimes, are those up or down in the city of Los Angeles?
Well, in general, it's down, but I like to think it's because we're monitoring the registered sex offenders, though they still do reoffend at times. You can never eliminate that.
Mr. Zine,
Totally.
Mr. Reyes had a question on that same point. If we could, then we'll go back to you. And for the audio record, we've been joined by Council Members Perry and Cardenas also.
When it comes to monitoring, and I'm trying to get a sense of levels of influence by this monitoring, if you look at the whole city, most of these facilities are in multiple residential units, given the nature of the programs. So the concentration of these multi-residential units tend to be in the older parts of the city, because that's just the way the city evolved. Does that also mean that we have that many more monitors, or does it depend on the severity of the case of the individual in terms of how dangerous or how vulnerable the local community might be? How is that weighed? Because it's a little disconcerting to see just exactly how intense these concentrations are, especially around certain parks and certain schools. So is there a difference if you have more of these individuals concentrated in one area? Do you have more monitors, or does it depend on the nature of that person's history or conduct?
Well, the state of California recently moved in the right direction towards a risk assessment on every registered sex offender. And it's called the Static 99, and on various variables, the risk is assessed. So for those on parole, they have a score, and the parole agent assigned to the caseload, and these are specialized caseloads, they're GPS caseloads, they're 20 parolees to an agent, which is significantly less than the general parole caseload. So they are monitored closely. And when they are in shared living arrangements, i.e. that there's multiple sex offenders in one location,
Right.
there's multiple parole agents visiting that area, making compliance checks. The REACT teams go out on a regular basis and check these locations also. And then, of course, they're tracked via GPS. Probation cases, as I said, they may or may not have GPS, but they are monitored by probation officers. And then the rest, of course, depending on the local jurisdiction, are monitored by local law enforcement. And again, LAPD has the longest running and the most constantly staffed monitoring program. It's been in effect since 1997.
So if we wanted to have someone who knows about monitoring, let's say, I've had community meetings where parents are very upset when they find out just how many of these facilities are in one area, especially around the parks or the schools. Is there someone you can point us to that can explain how we are performing as monitors when we are dealing with that type of concentration? Are there people that we can speak to that you can refer us to?
To parole and probation.
Right, to be able to share with the parents. Because my struggle is, and I chair the land use committee, is that when we do deal with these issues, I'm always told the state has higher jurisdiction. It doesn't matter what laws you put in place. If the state wants to put a program in that area, it can do it because state overrides local jurisdictions. And that's what we've been told over and over again.
Well, as far as information, I would point them in my direction, because I could certainly...
Okay, we'll get your card later.
But the bottom line is, it's a very emotional topic for people. It's a not in my backyard issue that it boils down to. And unfortunately, while residency restrictions may make people feel better, there's no evidence that shows that it makes the public safer. And that's, of course, what it's all about, is actually increasing public safety.
Thank you.
Gary?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the local land use implications. I know with group homes that are run by the state, you have up to 6 people that they can go into a community by right without asking for any sort of discretionary approval by the local jurisdictions. If you want to exceed that, then that's when you get into local land use authority and the ability of the city to be able to impose conditions on the way that the provider or the operator manages its clients. And so, you know, we mentioned that example earlier of 47 people in one building. I remember that case because that was a pretty egregious example. But I guess I'm trying to reconcile, you know, once you go over the by right threshold, how we affect the number of facilities or sex offender, registered sex offender residents that may go into a census tract. And the reason I bring this up is because I do remember that many years ago, I think she was a state senator at the time, Diane Watson, did do some work on this issue because there was an extremely high concentration of registered sex offenders at that time over in what was Nate Holden's council district at that time. They were serving, and I wondered if you knew if anything at the state level ever took place, and if so, what it was, in terms of limiting the number, basically dealing with the concentration issue. Yeah.
At the state level, no. Jessica's law, when it passed, enabled local jurisdictions to pass residency restrictions, which is the only way that it's controlled, really. The 47, I believe, were in a kind of a residential hotel location. And even though not popular and people, it scares them to have a group of sex offenders in one location where they can be more closely monitored by parole isn't necessarily a bad thing, because the alternative is, where are they placed? Many of them go homeless. So in the city of Los Angeles, I know that the city planning department was looking into the proliferation of sober living homes. That's where the 6 or fewer residents of a single-family dwelling, not licensed by the state, by nature not licensed, not regulated, no services offered. Communities are concerned about those too because they pop up in the middle of residential locations and populated again by parolees. And in my opinion, parole is very responsive to the concerns of the community. And if a sober living facility comes up where it's causing a lot of community concern, they will move the parolees to another location. But the emphasis is they're simply moved. They're simply shuffled to somewhere else.
Mr. Cardenas? Mr. Zine?
Well, I'd like to continue this matter and have the state parole probation come and testify to what resources they have, because every time I read an article about the state with the budget deficit, all those departments seem to be reducing personnel, furloughing personnel, and I don't have a lot of faith in the state actually doing anything that we're responsible for our community and for the folks in our community. So what I'd like to do, Mr. Chair, is to continue this matter and have the state parole probation testify, also the GPS, exactly how that system works, so we can have some confidence in exactly what they're doing with these individuals. In addition, the state's releasing, I understand, 20,000 individuals. They're not supposed to be violent, but I will tell you from my experience, you don't go to state prison if you're committing petty theft. People go to state prison because they've committed some very serious crimes. And if they're not a hardened criminal, by the time they get there, then they'll be a hardened criminal. And if they're a sexual deviant and they're taking their aggression out on our society, the law-abiding citizens, we have a responsibility to do something about it. So I'd like to have the folks that are actually dealing with this on a day-to-day basis testify, and we'll find out, do they have the resources that we hope they have? Do we have the faith in the state system that they're going to actually do something to protect the neighborhoods and the folks from these individuals who committed these crimes? But we have Megan's Law, Jessica's Law, and I don't want to end up having another law with another child's name because we weren't proactive in trying to prevent what tragically happens to too many of the folks in our society. So I'd make that request. We continue it, have those folks come forward. Because I don't know how the GPS system works, but I find it hard to believe that someone's monitoring an individual 24 hours a day on a GPS system. So the particulars of that, I think, would give us some confidence and to know exactly how the system is working. Also, what the police department on the divisional level, what resources they're deploying from this for this particular aspect. I know they got all kinds of crimes to handle, investigate, but this is a serious matter that I think has been gone through a lot of different scenarios, and every time someone gets molested, it becomes a news story, and then people get upset. What we're trying to do, at least what I'm trying to do with my colleagues, is make sure we have protection for the people. So the state parole, state probation, the GPS folks, and whatever the police department on the ground resources that obviously aren't under your jurisdiction, but in the divisional levels.
Well, I can't speak to that.
I understand. No, that's what I'm saying. You can or can't?
I can.
Okay. So
What the department is doing.
The issue of, does each division have officers assigned to this? Is the sole responsibility? Do they monitor these people on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? Is the GPS system a system monitored 24 hours a day? All those kind of questions that I think would give us some confidence to know we're doing something. And also with the state releasing prisoners, 20,000 and another 20,000 because of the budget, are any of these folks coming out that could fall in this category and then take their aggression out on people in our society who are trying to just live a happy life?
Well, the answers to the first series of questions was all yes.
Okay. But you're not parole, you're not probation, you're not state.
No, the first series was LAPD.
Okay.
That, yes, there are registration enforcement and compliance teams that are staffed exclusively with investigators that do nothing but register, enforce registration requirements, investigate cases of violations, and those individuals violating, 90% of them are felons, so they are returned to state prison.
And that's at a divisional level?
That's out of the Bureau, and then in South Bureau, there are out of the division. So the entire city is covered. There's 7 units that do nothing but the registration enforcement. And as I said, that's been in effect since the late 90s.
Okay.
And the non-revocable parole, the individuals that are being released from prison, none of those have sex offenses convictions in their past. They're not eligible for that really non-parole release, the ones that cannot be violated. They're not the sex offenders.
Okay.
And the 24-hour monitoring of GPS, it could be done 24 hours if there was a parole agent watching it. And I won't speak to exactly what parole does because I'm not a parole agent, but all the REACT officers do have access to the GPS system also. So we can view, the officers can view the tracks of the registered sex offenders to see where they've been and currently where they are,
How long does it maintain that track?
forever.
No, I mean, for example, can they look back at midnight last night and say what they did from midnight till 10 o'clock this morning?
Yes, and we can look for last week and 2 months ago and 6 months ago.
So
It keeps the record.
it's a continuing track of everything. Does it give location? Does it give, I mean, how does it?
Yes, it gives location with a certain amount of drift because it is bouncing off of
GPS are
satellites.
usually within 300 feet or something like that, so that's pretty accurate.
Exactly. And it's been actually very useful in solving crimes. There was a particular case out in the valley where an individual was around where a crime had occurred. And even though the GPS doesn't transmit accurately in an underground parking lot or where the signal can't,
Right.
be received, it resulted in a case that would not have been solved before, that the individual just got many decades as far as a prison term, so we won't be seeing him again. So it's actually very useful. And Chelsea's law, the AB 1844, with increased parole time, there will be more individuals who are under that and being supervised formally for a longer period of time. Again, parole and probation only accounts for about 25% of the total registered sex offenders, so 75% fall on the shoulders of the REACT officers.
And they're all registered. They come out, they register.
Correct.
How many of them actually maintain that location where they're supposed to be or where they're supposed to reside? Versus, because I know that with this early release situation, they were out for one day, tell them where they're living, and they're kind of free to float where they want to go. Now, that may not be the case with the sexual individuals, but how many of them actually comply with that once they're released? So law enforcement will know who it is, where they are staying, what they're doing.
Well, they have to comply. So they come out and they register, and then the various supervising entities, of which REACT is a big part, follows up on that. We go check to make sure that they're living where they say they're living.
And what kind of compliance are we getting from that?
Well, the parolees, the compliance is pretty good because they have so many people following up on them, and they have a parole violation and a new case hanging over their heads. At any given time, an estimate 10% are out of compliance that we know about and are currently doing cases on, but 34 REACT officers throughout the city, 5,266 registered sex offenders. There's only so many you can check up on.
No,
at
that's
any
my
one time.
point. That's my point.
Okay. We could certainly use more REACT officers.
Exactly. Okay. So anyway, if we can continue that and bring those folks.
Mr. Reyes, and we have one public card also.
Thank you. When you mentioned the reality of the concentration on the harbor, and I'm assuming it's because it's near industrial zones where you have certain criteria for these places to be situated. But just so happens in the city, we've got the highest concentration of people around industrial zones as well, because they tend to be the poor parts of town, and therefore you've got a large number of folks who may not speak English, who may not know the system. So the reported crimes is my big question. I'm wondering how many incidents occur that don't get reported because of those dynamics. Yet you have this concentration of these type of individuals amongst them, because that's where they're relegated, given our criteria. Would that be accurate?
Well, I wouldn't know how many crimes weren't reported.
I'm not asking about the crimes report, I'm talking about the concentration.
Actually, what the REACT officers also receive are actually citizen tips through the Megan's Law website, and we do get a lot of tips from individuals throughout the city. English-speaking, non-English-speaking, a lot of people like to give us information on when somebody is in violation. So as to unreported crimes, I
Who
don't
knows?
know,
Of
but we
course.
do get a lot of citizen interaction and a lot of tips as far as registered sex offenders in general that are followed up on by our REACT teams.
Is there such a thing as being overly concentrated? In other words, is there a threshold? I mean, at what point do you say this much is too much? Is there anything like that that, from your opinion, should be established? Because we're talking about policy here, and we're talking about how do we decentralize. Yet what you're saying is, what are the options? They're stuck as in a homeless situation, and in that instance, you really don't know where they're at, and therefore more dangerous. So, but is there a level of pragmatism? I mean, how much is too much? I mean, I look at maps around parks in my district. We just built 2 primary centers, a middle school, and 2 high schools within 6 blocks. And yet, if you look at the map, the dots aren't dots anymore. They're just massive blotches of there's so many in that pocket. Yet we just finished putting in thousands and thousands of kids in that area. So how much is too much? Is there such a thing in terms of this overconcentration?
Well, I think it depends on the availability of housing. I'm glad that you brought that up because recently Harbor and State Parole did meet about the sheer number of parolees that were being placed in Harbor because the REACT team could hardly keep up with simply the registrations. There were so many registrants down there. And it was mitigated to a certain extent that the threshold was the police department couldn't keep up any longer and adequately monitor individuals there. So as far as a concrete number, I can't say. It's still a delicate balancing act between where these individuals can live and have stable housing.
Mr. Chair, if it's possible, could we, just to give it some kind of context, maybe if you can provide for us maybe these thresholds of concentrations. I mean, maybe we should know where is it, I mean, at what point, maybe where's it, no one really knows the tipping point because the question really becomes where do they go?
Citywide.
Citywide, but at least you understood those concentration issues, then maybe we can target resources so that we can address the Harbor area and other areas that might be in that condition. And it'll give us at least a bird's eye view of just how big of a problem this is instead of doing it in piecemeal.
Detective, can you bring that back into us in a month or so, that kind of information?
Yes, we monitor that monthly, actually, and have numbers on that. And it's regularly reported to ComStat also.
Okay. Then Mr. Zion's motion was to come back in 30 days, invite state parole and probation people, and then we'd like you to see that map if we could. So with that, let's bring Dr. Williams up for public comment, and then unless you have anything further, we'll probably order that in just a moment. Thank you.
Dr. Clyde Williams, 4115 Barrett Road, El Sereno, Northeast LA, also executive board member of the LA neighborhood, LA 32 neighborhood council. Last Wednesday, this subject was a major issue within our neighborhood council hearing, and it creates a great deal of conflict. My assumption is always presumption of innocence. That's a problem. Like marijuana, like Prop 8, like many other things, there's always fundamentals, presumption of innocence. However, the board and the stakeholders in this particular meeting want to know why El Sereno, especially Valley Boulevard, has a disproportionate number of designated sex offenders. At least that's what they feel. And they looked at it on all of the web pages that are available, and there are a lot. And they said there seems to be more of a dumping ground in El Sereno than other places. There are 90 neighborhood councils. Each one usually has a public safety element in it. Each one often has a lot of neighborhood watches in them. And here is, I say, give people some resources, give them some point of contact with either within the local police departments or in the city hall to help. They have a great deal of interest, and especially in why does it seem to be dumping here rather than dumping there? Or there are 90 neighborhood councils, shouldn't there be, let's say 5 per neighborhood council district? I don't know. My problem is, I presume innocence until proven guilty. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, one of the, Dr. Williams, one of the land use issues there in that corridor is you have a major industrial zone that follows the railroad track on Valley. And you follow that all the way through Alhambra, and you see throughout the city, we have these industrial zones, you have, and the older parts have residential right up against it. And therefore, all these facilities tend to be, they're in the path of least resistance, if you will, because of the zoning. And that tends to be one of the reasons.
There was a great deal of heat for 15 minutes, 3-some-odd people.
Okay, John, for clarification, item special 1 and item number 12 on the printed agenda are the same item?
They are.
So should we, do we need to call 12 then? And
No, that was a typographical error in photocopying the agenda.
so on items 1 and special 1 and number 11, 12, we are then going to order that it come back in, say, middle of September.
Yes, sir.
We'll have an invitation to the 2 state departments, and Detective Webb will come back with further information on congregation, et cetera,
Okay.
for that report.
Thank you.
That'll be the order. Detective, thank you very much. It was a very good discussion and very, very informative. We appreciate it very much. And that brings us back to then regular item number 1.
Item 1, Board of Fire Commissioners Report relative to the Fire Department's fiscal year 2010-2011 annual cost of special services fee adjustments.
Chief, how are you today?
Good morning. Thank you. Mark Storms, Assistant Chief, Assistant Fire Marshal. What we have is these, in our efforts to be supported and to properly distribute the cost of doing business throughout the fire prevention responsibilities, we've looked in a conscientious manner and made adjustments to the amount of hours that are spent to represent the different jobs and inspections that are conducted. In the past, we generally had a set fee, a 2-hour minimum, or for these different type of occupancies. And what we've done is we've looked at the different breakdown relative to the actual hours that our inspectors are spending, and that's what this breakdown is, as well as upgrading the hourly rate to better represent the work that is done by the inspectors.
Okay. Mark, there's a number of these items in here. So were all of them anticipated in the 10-11 budget, or are some of these new to the 10-11 budget?
These are new.
These are all new. None of the revenue from any of
The
these?
revenue for these are not part of the budget.
None of them, okay, that's important. Then, does that count under the Schedule H instruction for new revenues that go back into modified deployment reduction? Then, because I think the specification of Schedule H was any new revenues that exceeded the department's budget go back into reducing modified deployment.
I'd have to check on that.
I introduced that, but I'm not sure whether I specified it was just that one item or all items. I don't remember. So, all right, please check on that for us. Chief, do you?
I don't know as well.
Yeah. You'd think I'd know that because I introduced it, but that was a long week. So, okay, so you'll check back on that, whether the Schedule H requirement applies then to all these new revenues, which is $1.5 million or so of these items. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Any other members? No?
I got it.
Mr. Reyes? Mr. Zine?
The issue going from 13 to 23, 77% increase, brush initial inspection fee. There was a lot of controversy from the community about the $13, and now you want to go to $23.
Yes,
It
sir.
wasn't collected for a number of years, and then they started collecting. Is that what occurred?
Yes, sir. It was originally introduced in 98 and passed in 99. The fee established at that time was $13. The fee was initially designed to help offset the operating costs of the brush clearance unit in the processing of the 132,000 parcels that are within the brush zone. The $23 increase is a,
Well, my question though is 98, 99. When do they start collecting it?
this year, sir, was the first time we've ever, well, it was initially started in 99.
Well, that's the problem. All those years it wasn't collected.
Yes, sir.
And then now we collected in 2010, and now we're going to jack it up 77% for 2011. That creates a lot of controversy.
The fee was increased relative to try to pick up the 9-year spread to bring it up to speed with the 9 years that it has not been in place.
And on that 132,000 parcels, how do they actually do the inspection? Do they go out there physically? Do they walk the grounds? Do they do it from the air? How do they figure that out?
Yes, sir. There's a brush task force that is put together every year with volunteers out of the regular fire stations to come in and assist the brush task or the brush unit. Those inspections are done in a 30-day period. It's a sweep of the entire very high fire severity zone, and those are done by people that receive special training and have done it in the past.
So every single parcel is inspected, and then those that don't comply get a notice to comply.
Yes, sir, as well as the publicly owned parcels as well.
And then we go through that issue with the hearings with the commission and here in the council.
Yes, sir.
Which we just completed. Are there any exemptions for low income or disabled or seniors?
Not
Are there
at this
any exemptions on
not
that?
at this time, sir.
Well, what do we do for a person who's keeping their grounds up? They live in the Mountain Fire District, and I represent Woodland Hills, Tarzana. I know there's a lot of areas that are covered in this. I think you have some too.
If you,
Northridge.
about half my district, yeah.
So what do we do for the folks that are complying, keeping the vegetation in compliance with 200-foot radius, et cetera?
It's always a nice.
And not like overgo paying for that, but they're on fixed incomes, such as our senior citizen population or disabled people. Normally, we have, with the different fees, different provisions for certain categories. Was that ever discussed regarding the category?
I was not privy to the current discussions that took place prior to this $13 being enacted. I know that 8 years ago, when I was in charge of brush clearance, we did not have any differentiation between different folks that were living in the area. It was a set fee that was set to offset the cost, and it was divided by the number of parcels, and that was where the $13 per parcel came from at that time.
And we had a lot of people complain about the 13, and I can understand and anticipate there'll be a lot more complaints.
Yes.
23.
This year, when the $13 was initiated, the opt-out program was part of it. Every homeowner was given the opportunity to opt out of the inspection and do their own. All they had to do was provide documentation to the brush clearance unit, and they would be not charged the $13.
So we could still have that opt-out with the 23?
Yes, sir. That procedure will be ongoing year to year.
Okay, so people who don't want to pay it, there is a provision, they can contact the fire department to opt out.
Yes, sir. There's a written notice that goes out in the mail, and the procedure is on the back of the notice.
That goes out with the original notification of brush clearance, the first notification?
Yes.
Mr. Cardenas?
Thank you, Chairman. When you talk about documentation, if they want to forego the fee and do it themselves, what kind of, can you give me an example of what kind of documentation they're required to provide? Pictures?
Yes, sir.
Receipts from vendors if they hired some, what?
No, there's no, going off of memory, I didn't bring that file with me, but it's pictures of it, It's a map indicating that that parcel does truly represent the pictures that are being provided, because you could take pictures of someone else's property and put it in as being yours. So we asked for a copy of the, a Xerox copy of the assessor's map to go with the pictures.
Okay. And any written explanation on their behalf?
No,
I mean, that documentation that just comes in, you have to guess who it is? I mean, do they say, this is who I am,
No.
this is my address, this is my name, under penalty of perjury, this is true, what do they?
no, the opt-out program comes with a form. And on the form, it indicates everything that's supposed to be attached to it when it's submitted back to the brush clearance unit. There's a regular form that is on the back of the letter that you can use out. Has the parcel number, the location, contact numbers for billing, contact numbers for information.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
On the opt-out, if they decide to opt out, but they don't really take care of it, then what happens?
Then they would be found in non-compliance and put back in the system and charged the $13 fee.
So maybe they- maybe they-
23.
If they don't, if they're not accurate, if they try to deceive, maybe there should be some kind of additional penalty. But if they want to be honest about it, that's fine, because you're not going to inspect it, but ultimately you are going to inspect it. And if they're not in compliance, and they were deceptive, because they're going to send this document saying this is clear. You don't look at it, it's not clear. I assume you're going to go back and look at it anyway,
Yes, sir.
without a fee. And if in fact they were deceptive, maybe there should be some condition
Well, that's when,
to give them an additional fee or fine for not being honest with you.
There's a number of issues that we talked with regarding the brush clearance program with the city attorney. We can bring that up with them to see, and we could also get kind of a feel of how many people were less than truthful in their documentation at the end of the year.
How many do you find?
No, I said it'll be interesting to
Or
see.
you haven't?
We haven't completed all the opt-outs yet.
It'd be interesting to check that and then find out if there are a number of them, a great number of them. There needs to be, if they're going to be honest, that's fine. If they're going to be deceptive, then there should be some consequences for that, other than just the $23 fine.
Yes, sir.
or fee.
but if you go back and catch them after the fact, they opted out and didn't comply, now they're going to get the administrative fee and the cleaning fee anyway.
Yes,
So
sir.
they're going to get slammed pretty hard anyway.
They will be charged, yes, sir.
Yeah, at least $1,000.
Well, the inspection fees come, I mean, the administrative fees coming down. You're reducing that.
still $997.
Yes.
Yeah. He wants to get them more. It's not enough for Mr.
Just
Zine.
want to be honest, that's all. Just
All right. No other questions? We have one card from the public, Dr. Clyde Williams, and Dr. Williams, this is about fees. This is not about how good of a job they do in brush clearance, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Williams? Dr. Williams? Going once, twice?
third call. And
Dr. Clyde Williams, El Sereno. The brush clearance, it's the only fee that appears to be of interest to people. Why? One of the questions that I've always had is, if you're going to have rules, you enforce them. If you don't enforce
This is
them...
not about enforcement, this is about a fee.
It's about the fees. So, okay, it costs $160 an hour for a fire inspector to look at things. So $23, does that tell me something? You pay for what you get. Is it enough? I don't believe it's enough. It should be much more, because the confusion that has been created over this last year and implementation of the 2009-10 will be repeated next year. Enforcement is not consistent because they don't have enough money. If they don't have enough money, how can you have enforcement? If the fees aren't high enough, nobody even really worries about it. People were sending in $13 in default without an invoice, no charge or anything, because they didn't read it. Many people went to the local fire stations, and the firemen there had to explain what was going on because the documents that were provided weren't adequate for people to really understand what was going on. I did mine, I took it to Van Nuys. Why? In order to make sure that I had a signature and a stamp on it. Why? Because I know things get lost. And that seems to have been the problem. If there's not enough money in the budget, if there's not enough hours to spend on it, hey, 1 hour per plot? That's travel time plus inspection time, $160. That seems to be a much better figure than 23.
You can stay right there because we're going to public comment. Just a point reference, if people didn't understand and they were confused, we have 131,000 lots cleaned. We have 150 appeals. That's barely 1/10%. So there's not a lot of confusion out there. I think I'd argue that point. This goes further, if there's no objection, committee. Does this go to Budget and Finance next, or is?
No, sir, just public
Correct?
safety.
All right, this goes to council with approval. And Mr. Williams, last comment, public comment? Mr. Williams, public comment?
General?
General comment, not an item on today's agenda?
So I can't talk about fire department.
You can talk about the fire
So,
department, just talk about those things. All
my comment on number 1 was adequate. Thank you.
right, thank you very much. That concludes today's meeting. Thank you very much.